Bridgeton, Missouri is home to the Westlake landfill. This is one of the most important locations in the history of atomic energy. Today we're discussing the impact of radioactive waste dumped right outside of St. Louis. I'm your host, Brittany Noble. You are watching the Open Source TV. Stay with us. After the start of World War II, St. Louis-based chemical company Mallinckrodt was under contract to process uranium needed for large-scale production operation. We're told the radioactive waste was then dumped into Bridgeton's Westlake landfill. Karen Nickel joins us here on the Open Source TV to share more about her experience living near chemical waste. This is something that you experienced very young, correct?
Yeah, I actually grew up in an area where some of that waste was allowed to seep into a creek, Coldwater Creek, in North County in St. Louis. And I lived just a few short houses away from where that creek was located. The creek would flood many, many times, where it would flood up into the streets, and then it would recede, and it would, unbeknownst to all of us, leave thorium dust on the streets. And it would leave those materials in a park that all of us played in. Wow. And my parents didn't know anything about that. And none of the parents that I know of knew nothing.
Okay. So we're playing at the park. We're in the streets. We're outside.
Ingesting thorium dust.
Not knowing.
Not knowing, no.
Okay.
And my parents actually, we moved to that location because my parents wanted us to be in a better school district. You know, they wanted the American dream. Yes. You know, we had a pool in the backyard. So it was a great place to live. There were a lot of children on the street. So yeah, they had no idea.
So this is where you grew up?
That is where I grew up. And I moved as an adult, 1.8 miles away from the Westlake landfill. And it contains the same radioactive materials that were moved from the same area that I grew up in as a child.
When did you start to figure out something's not right?
Well, I was diagnosed with lupus several years ago, and I went into a really bad flare in 2012. And my doctor had mentioned that it could be an environmental result. And I had just seen on TV something about Coldwater Creek and some radioactive materials. Wow. And so I went and did a little research, and I started doing some investigation, and I found that there was a Coldwater Creek Just the Facts Facebook page. So that prompted me to reach out to some of my friends that I grew up with on my street alone.
Wow. And
learned that there were 15 people on my street that had passed away from cancer early in their 40s. 4 other women had also developed lupus and multiple sclerosis and other autoimmune diseases just in that little circumference. It blew my mind. I also learned that there was going to be a meeting held to learn about the cleanup of the waste that was going on by the Army Corps of Engineers. So I attended that meeting. After the meeting was over, I met a gentleman from Missouri Coalition for the Environment, and he was handing out flyers about the Westlake landfill. I didn't even know about the Westlake landfill. Come to find out, I learned, mentioned that I lived close to that landfill, raising my own 4 kids for the past 20 years.
Have you noticed any problems with your children?
My youngest daughter has sensory issues. My granddaughter, who is 3, was born with a mass on her right ovary that had to be removed when she was 3 weeks old. I have my youngest son is severely ADHD. So, yes, my grandchildren, my own children have had health issues off and on. My sister had to have her appendix removed when she was 11, but it wasn't her appendix. Her ovaries were covered with cysts at 11 years old.
Wow.
So yes, there have been a lot of health issues in my family. I had to have a hysterectomy when I was 40. I have several autoimmune diseases now. There are days that it's very hard for me to get out of my bed. But why do I do this? Why do I do this fight? I've been asked that question, and I'm sure that was going to be one of your questions.
You know.
Because I will go to the ends of the earth to fight for my children. And I have to know that when I lay down at night, I've done it. I've done it that day, and I'll keep doing it. And I have to protect my kids, which has now turned into protecting other people's kids. I have a whole community that I fight for now. And
I want you to talk to us about this Facebook group that you started.
I started the Westlake Landfill Facebook group. It's where people go to find information and share their stories about their own experiences. It's got over 20,000 members.
20,000 members?
Yes.
Well, you should be proud. And we have one of those members with us here today. So if you stay with us after the break, we'll talk with one of those members about this group that you started. Thank you so much. Stay with us. You're watching the Open Source TV.
So whole girl concept is so important for us. So you hit on several. And one is the self-reliancy around economic literacy. We want our young people to understand that you really got to know how to plan for your future.
Welcome back. We have with us Dawn Chapman. She's one of the 20,000 members on the Facebook group that was formed to raise awareness about the landfill. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for being here.
I want you to tell me some of the stories from the people that are on this Facebook group. What are they sharing about their experiences?
Well, first of all, I'm so proud of them because the stories are heartbreaking. They're personal, they're medical issues, they're emotional, the loss, the fear that they have living next to this, the anger, the betrayal that they feel from their federal government creating this and just letting them stay here and letting their family members die and get sick. And that's, especially on social media like right now, right? That it's not always the most friendly place, but for them to be brave enough to post that and to just let their heart out there about what they're going through. I mean, they everything from loss of loved ones to mental health and emotional issues, everything is on that page. They tell their story. They don't want to be just a dot on the map. They want what they have gone through to matter and to create some sort of change so it doesn't happen to somebody else.
Dawn, I know this is personal, but it really got personal for you this week.
Yeah, it did.
I know it's difficult to talk about your friend.
Yeah, and I'm not going to mention his name out of privacy, but you know, when you, like with Karen's story, how hard it is for her to get out of bed in the morning, yet she continues to fight this. You know, we watched our friend be afraid and be fierce and be brave and have to do things and confront his government in these agencies and call out lies. And, you know, that it's not something he ever thought he'd have to do in his life. And for me, knowing that he passed away suddenly, I feel like this robbed him of more than just his life. It robbed him of peace. And I don't think that think people understand what it's like to live next to this and be robbed of joy and peace and to go to bed afraid every night. I mean, that is its own sort of torture that the Department of Energy continues to put these residents through.
You said your friend had a family that he tried to protect. He was afraid.
He was a coach. He coached a lot of children in this community growing up, and I mean, he was a hero to a lot of people, and in his mind, he struggled because he didn't know about this waste. And some of the ball fields that they would practice on are now known to be contaminated. or are next to sites that were dangerous. And I think for him, he blamed himself. And I remember he told me one time, because he kept every trophy that they had ever won. And he said, it's so hard to look at these trophies. They brought me such joy. And now all I can see is the faces of the kids, and to think that maybe I should have known somehow, and maybe I exposed them unknowingly. I mean, that's mental torture, and that's not what happened at all. But in his mind, he struggled, and you know, that's something that's not talked about enough.
Mom, that's not the only person that you know that has fallen sick,
No.
possibly due to the landfill. Can you talk about your son?
Yeah. 2 years ago, right before COVID hit, my son was diagnosed. And it's interesting because I look back now and I could see he was getting sick, and I didn't want to, think that. And I think Karen knew, and Karen kind of, dropped a few hints. And then we ended up getting a bad blood test and having to rush him to the ER from the pediatrician's office. And I knew the whole drive, I just thought, it's my turn. It's my turn. This is my turn. And I think I always knew that it could, but I do think there's a part of you that thinks that if you fight it hard enough, like Karen said, we're going to protect our kids, that we could get something done, and it wasn't too late, that we could. And at that moment, I realized, kind of like she did, it was too late for my family and for my son. And I remember sitting outside on the bench and just crying, and then having a realization, but it's not too late for somebody else's. And that has to be the focus. And now it's about protecting somebody else's kids, right? And that's not fair. It's totally not fair, but somebody has to, because if nobody does, then there's another mom that gets a bad blood test that is sitting outside of the children's hospital. I mean, it has to stop. And our government could make it stop at any moment.
We're going to keep talking about this. And I thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
We'll be back. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about the Westlake landfill in Bridgeton. Karen, how do you know that the radioactive waste is the cause of sickness in the neighborhood?
Well, I mean, I think we can first say that how do we know it's not? But we do have health studies. We have health studies that say that, one of them by the state of Missouri, that says that right here where we're sitting now, there's a 300% increase in brain cancers in children under the age of 17. There's other health studies that indicate, one by the federal government Agency for Toxic and Substance Abuse Registry, that says that there's increased cancers in areas where the creek had come up, and those deposits that we talked about earlier, leaving thorium dust and whatnot, could have caused cancers. There were pathway exposures, one of which being riding your bike when I was a child,
Right.
kicking up the thorium dust, eating vegetables out of your garden, digging in your garden. There are recommendations on those health studies from ATSDR that indicate that as of today, you should take your shoes off before you go in your house.
Wow.
You should not be digging in your backyard. Those are health studies that say that to this day, that people don't even know about, that are sitting out there. There are also health studies out there for the people in the surrounding area of Bridgeton that have been harmed by the emissions that were coming out of the fire, for our children that were having bloody noses and vomiting and headaches. A few years ago, we couldn't go to the park with our kids. We would have to take a bag of eye drops, inhalers, sinus medicine. You couldn't shop at Target without coming out and sometimes vomiting because of the odor. You know, we don't know what those long-term effects are going to be yet. We do have the data and the health studies right now, but what's the chronic? What's the long-term? You know, we know what the long-term is from Coldwater Creek, from the ATSDR study. What's the chronic exposure long-term from the emissions that we inhaled from the fire?
As a community, what do we do now?
Well, you know, we've been exposed already. So right now, we have to take into consideration, we have to get the health study from ATSDR, we have to get those recommendations out to everyone in this community to make sure that they know that that exists so they can protect themselves. In that recommendations, they are also able to take the study to their doctor. They are also able to call up ATSDR and say, hey, can you come with me, not physically, but can you help me with a consultation with my doctor? People don't know that. People need to be proactive with their health. They need to get early screenings.
Okay.
They need to be able to have access to health because we deserve it.
You're not going to stop fighting, are you?
No, 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 how can we? Our friends die. How can we? You know, our friend that just passed away, he's not going to be the last. You know, our children are going to die. You know? Dawn mentioned that she was finally the one. I have 4 kids. I have 5 grandkids. My children have married other Coldwater Creek babies that have grown up to be adults. My children are having Coldwater Creek babies. My granddaughter that was born with the mass on her ovary, my son was a Coldwater Creek baby. His wife is a Coldwater Creek baby. What are my odds? What are my odds of losing a child before their time? What are my odds because of my DNA and because of what I let them grow up around? Oh, but not only radioactive waste, now they grew up around the emissions of an underground fire that was allowed to burn and be exposed to. What are my odds? You know? I don't know.
Taryn, thank you for your openness. Thank you for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
Thank you for working to educate your community. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
You've been watching the Open Source TV. I am your host, Brittany Noble. We will see you next time.